On today's show, I'll break down my top 10 boldest predictions for the New York Mets this season.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Now, unfortunately, following up yesterday's show, where I spent a segment detailing why the Mets could still be in the mix for Jordan Montgomery, I have to report to all of you that not happening. The Arizona Diamondbacks swooped in, surprised us all, and they signed Jordan Montgomery to a one-year deal worth $25 million with a vesting option in year two. That vests based on start, innings pitch, and also incrementally rises the more that he does pitch for the Diamondbacks this year, where it could be another $25 million option. If he pitches well, he'll hit free agency, and just like Blake Snell, will be joining a crowded starting pitching market. But that is the last Boris domino to fall, and it doesn't fall to the Mets. I don't blame them. At that dollar amount, $25 million for this year would have cost Steve Cohen a pretty penny on luxury tax. All of a sudden, Jordan Montgomery is more than a $50 million pitcher to the Mets this year. And that is a lot to spend. I think if this was a long-term contract that he signed and the AAV was lower, he'd be a little bit more upset about it. Also, I would say you don't know what was on the table. Maybe the Mets did submit a similar offer, but the Arizona Diamondbacks are a great situation for Jordan Montgomery, joining the team that went to the World Series last year, a team that he beat in the World Series, but get a chance to pitch in a really good rotation. It's a good spot to win. And I don't know if he even wanted to come back to New York after starting his career there with the Yankees. Now let's get to my top 10 bold predictions, though. We're looking at the current crop on the New York Mets. And I will say it was harder for me to make this list than years past, because I realized in years past, I have had prospects to lean on a little bit to fill out my top 10. But I did a top 10 bold predictions for the Mets minor leaguers show a couple weeks ago that you can go back and watch and listen to if you want to. But in that show, I made a prediction like Drew Gilbert starting, I guess, at 50-plus games. And that right there could have been a prediction for the MLB club that I would have made in this show. Having a prediction on Luis Angel Acuna or Christian Scott. But instead, we're really just looking at the guys that are probably going to be on this roster come opening day. So let's start with the absolute studs on this team. My first bold prediction: Pete Alonso will hit 55 home runs, cost the Mets a lot of money in free agency. I believe he is going to come back, but the real prediction, though, is the 55 homers. Why did I go to 55? It's got to be bold. It can't just be Pete Alonso is going to hit 40. That's a given. Pete Alonso is going to hit 50. Well, he had 46 last year. Why 55? Matt Olson had 54 last year. I believe Pete Alonso could be every bit as good as Matt Olson. In this case, one home run better than he was last year. And if Pete Alonso has 55 home runs, what else is he going to do? My next bold prediction is the Mets are going to have two finishers in the top 5 for MVP voting. Alonso is going to be in the top 5. And the second prediction that is tied to this one is that Francisco Lindor is going to be in the top 3. Now, what kind of season would Lindor have to have where Alonso could hit 55 home runs and Lindor would get more MVP votes? I'll tell you. Back in 2018, Francisco Lindor had a 7.8 F-WAR season. So he was worth about 8 wins above replacement. I think he's going to have another one of those this year, and it's going to be even better. Might be an 8.5 win season, and the reason why it's going to be so good is his defense is going to be amazing as always. Last year, his numbers defensively were solid, but they weren't elite. We found out after the season, though, just recently, that he was playing with a bum elbow all year. So now that he has a clean bill of health, I think the defensive numbers are going to just jump up again. I also believe that we're going to see a little more power from Lindor this year. maybe he can get to 40 home runs or at least get close to it. He's never hit 40 in his career. That might be another milestone he can reach. I think he's going to steal a ton of bases. I think he's going to drive in a lot of runs. And I also believe this might be the year where we finally get a really good batting average from Francisco Lindor. He's in a great lineup now. Obviously, he was going to have Pete Alonso hitting behind him anyway, but to have JD Martinez behind him as well, that could have him score even more runs. I just look at Francisco Lindor, and I think this might be the year when we look back at his Mets career 10, 15 years from now, and maybe even look at his Hall of Fame case. There's going to be a year that's circled where Francisco Lindor had his best season in a Mets uniform. And at this age of 30 years old, with this team that has this underdog chip on their shoulder, I think Lindor is going to put together a absolutely monster campaign. Sticking with the star players, I don't know if this is bold, but he's never done it before. So I am throwing it on there. And that is Brandon Nimmo is going to make his first all-star team. But what actually makes it bold is he's going to be joined by Francisco Alvarez. I think Alvarez is going to be an all-star with Brandon Nimmo. That's not to say those are the only all-stars on the Mets, but I think those guys are going to have really good seasons, especially in the beginning. And they're either going to get voted in or add to the roster. It's going to be tougher, I think, for Brandon in some respects, just because outfield can get pretty crowded. They don't go by position, so it's not like him now being in left field gives him a better shot at it. You know Acuna is going to be in that starting outfield. I'm trying to think who else is sort of guaranteed a spot. Is Bellinger going to be an outfielder out there? Is Tatis going to be one of the starting outfielders? Betts now moving to the infield. That frees up one guy, but Brandon Nimmo deserves to be an all-star at some point in his career. I think it happens this year, and I think Francisco Alvarez is going to do so as well, which leads into my fourth prediction here. I got to stay on top of these notes. That Francisco Alvarez is going to take home some hardware this year. Now that gives me a little bit of a wider range because now I'm taking two shots at the apple here. It could be Gold Glove, Silver Slugger, one of the two. But I think Alvarez is going to establish himself as one of the best catchers in baseball. I would not put it past him to hit 40 home runs, although I'm not predicting it. I really believe he can raise that average this year to a more respectable mark and be a more consistent hitter. But it is a huge, huge season for Francisco Alvarez, and I am expecting him to deliver in more ways than one. The way he showed up defensively this spring with that cannon of an arm of his and how he has harnessed it, how he was just gunning down runners that could maybe become a real threat for the Mets to be able to just keep that running game in check because guys just don't want to test that arm of his. Those are the things that really help you within the margins. And the way that Alvarez committed himself to work so hard at that and the rest of his craft this offseason, I just think the sky is the absolute limit for Francisco Alvarez. And with that, I have also broken down the top four performers I believe the Mets will have this year. I think they're going to be driven in a large way by what they get from Francisco Alvarez, Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, and Brandon Nimmo. It's not to say that JD Martinez and Jeff McNeil can't have big years as well, or that you might not get a little bit more from guys in the rotation than you expect. And we'll talk about them in a little bit here. But to me, those four players should be the best ones on the Mets this year. And if they all have great seasons, collectively, that should push the Mets to being a playoff team. I got 6 more bold predictions for you, though, so we'll get to them in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Testing your skills on Prize Picks this season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $1,000 with just a few taps because daily fantasy sports is made easy with Prize Picks, where you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Right now, you can look at the MLB season stats by finding the MLB season tab. That's MLB SZN. And there you can find Francisco Lindor with his season hits projection at 149.5. I'd probably take the over there. You got a fun one. Brandon Nimmo, multi-home run games at just 0.5. So they're not expecting him to ever hit 2 home runs in a game this season. But if you take the more there and he has a 2 home run game and Lindor gets 150 hits, and maybe you look at Edwin Diaz's saves at 32.5. One of my predictions coming up would tell you to absolutely take the more there. Combine them all, you can win big. And you could also play this daily throughout the season, of course, and pick more or less on hits, strikeouts, home runs, all that stuff. All you got to do is download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. With the season nearly upon us, now is the perfect time to become a Locked On Mets insider and join our texting service where you can ask me questions anytime throughout the season, where you can also get the lineup set to your phone every day, and you can be part of our Locked On Mets giveaways. Signed photo of Brett Baty. I'm going to be texting out the information today on how you can get in for this signed photo. If you want to be part of the drawing, just subscribe. You can find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Speaking of Brett Baty, got a bold prediction for him, and I really wasn't sure which way to go. I wanted to articulate my belief in Brett Baty. So how do I do that? Do I say Brett Baty is going to be a top 10 third baseman in baseball? Probably even too bold for my blood. Do I say Brett Baty is going to hit 20 home runs? I could have gone that route, but for one, I don't know how much I believe it. Two, is that the craziest take that I could have when it comes to Brett Baty? Because he could hit 20 home runs and not have a good offensive season altogether. He could still be striking out a ton. It could just be volume of playing time, and he's running into some more baseballs. So I wanted to find something that would really showcase how good I think he's going to be this year. I think I found it. Brett Baty will post an OPS of 800 this season. That is a really, really tough task. For those of you who aren't aware, OPS is on base plus slugging. So for Brett Baty to post an 800 OPS, he's got to probably get at least up to a 350 on base. And really, I think for his profile as a hitter, maybe even closer to a 360, 370 on base, which is asking a ton. But in the minor leagues, we saw a guy that could do that. Someone who could hit for a high average and can draw his walks. And if he gets that plate discipline back to where he was when he was a top 20 prospect in all of baseball, and he has that chunk of it, then you're just asking for that slugging percentage to be north of 400. If he has a 360 on base, he needs a 440 slug. If he's hitting to a 270 plus average as part of that component, that's going to help the slug. And then just enough doubles and home runs to get him there. I think that's a really bold take to say he's going to get an 800 OPS season right here in his second full year. I would perfectly take a 750 OPS. I'd love that for Brett Baty, and particularly coming off last season, as dreadful as it was. But I think this is the year that he arrives. I think not having to face left-handed pitching is another thing the Mets can do to help kind of raise his stats. And it also is something that made me a little more hesitant to predict the home runs, because that might cut into his plate appearances a little bit. OPS, that's just strictly based on however much he plays, what that average is going to come out to. I think it's going to be a really nice year for Brett Baty. And if that happens, along with the 4 predictions I made already on the top-end talent on this team, the Mets are going to be rolling here. To close out my position player predictions, thought about Starling Marte, couldn't find one that I liked. Thought about Harrison Bader or Tyrone Taylor, or looking at Jeff McNeil even, and I couldn't find one that I liked. I just couldn't. Could I have predicted Jeff McNeil to hit 300? Sure, but I don't know if I consider that bold. I really don't. So here it is. My bold prediction: Zach Short remains on the Mets roster for this entire season. Now, he just barely made the roster out of camp. When he first made the team, or when he first got picked up by the team off waivers, I don't think anyone really expected him to make the team. But here he is, off a good spring, finding himself on the opening day roster, and paired with my prediction that he's going to be on the roster all season, I think Joey Wendell is not. That's right. I had to put a negative Joey Wendell prediction in here because he is the guy this year. He's the one that everyone's going to be sending me texts on subtext or sending me messages on Twitter about, where Wendell just got a hit. Haha, you're going to have to buy that jersey. For those of you who might be new, every year we have a jersey bet. And this all started with Jonathan VR back in 2021, where I thought that he was a terrible acquisition because I watched him play baseball with the Marlins the year prior. and I just thought the guy was not going to give you any production. I think the fact that he's already out of the league a couple years later makes me a little bit right in retrospect on my feelings of who VR was as a player, but that season, he was great. And so I had made some bet with the audience that I would buy a jersey if he had, I think, a 700 OPS. Sure enough, he did. The next year, it was James McCann. Never had to buy that jersey. The Mets are still paying him $8 million, though, regardless. Then last season, it was Tommy Pham, and Tommy Pham made me look stupid, too. So the fact that I'm predicting Joey Wendell will be off this roster probably secures that he won't be. He'll have a great season, and that's fine. But I look at Joey Wendell, especially now that Zach Short's on this team, and I think that spot on the roster could be better served from a different player. Because Brett Baty is going to be your starting third baseman who's left-handed, because Jeff McNeil is your starting second baseman and he's left-handed. Having the right-handed complement as your utility defender in the infield makes a lot of sense. That's why I like Zach Short and I like him to stay on the team, because if he's outperforming over Joey Wendell, and the Mets decide they need to add another bat to their bench, they want to bring up Drew Gilbert potentially at some point while keeping Taylor and Bader, whatever it ends up being, I think Joey Wendell at some point might get DFA'd. So that's my combination of a bold prediction. Short on the roster, Wendell not on the roster all year. Now let's talk about a pitcher. This prediction, I think, is extraordinarily bold. Luis Severino will strike out 200 batters this season. Now, this is a twofold prediction. On one sense, it's saying he's going to be good to strike out that many guys. The other part of it is it's saying he's going to be healthy. I think Severino is going to be the biggest steal of the offseason for the Mets, which I did not feel when they first signed him. And it's not just, well, I guess it is maybe just me getting swayed by the spring results, but it's the way he's looked in spring. The fact that his stuff never left and he's getting the results you'd expect, and he looks confident on the mound, not like a guy that's still searching for something. He is now a couple years removed from Tommy John. He had 2 seasons where he stayed relatively healthy. He obviously missed time both years, but was able to get 100 innings in each, I believe, or actually last year might have come just short of it. But I think Sevy is going to put together a real renaissance season where he's going to show you some semblance of the guy that was an ace for the Yankees years ago. And he's going to be that for the Mets, because they're going to need someone to step up in that spot. Kodai Senga will eventually return. The Mets could make a move at the deadline to add another top-flight pitcher, but if this team's going to be as good as I hope they will be, they're going to need somebody to really break out in a massive way in that rotation. And to me, Severino is the guy that you look at right now, and you can at least make a bold prediction and not feel like you're just trying to talk yourself into something. If I said Sean Manaea was going to pitch to a sub-3 ERA, or Jose Quintana was going to be an all-star, or Adrian Hauser or Tyler McGill is going to throw 180 innings, whatever I could have predicted on those guys, none of them would have felt right to me. This one, I actually think it can happen, and I hope it does, because if Severino can be that guy again, if he can strike out 200 and give you 180 innings pitched, which is a ton to ask, maybe it's 160 with a ridiculous strikeout rate, but that's where the prediction lies. It's having to get that health out of him. I'm basically saying he's going to make every start here. We saw last year Kodai Senga, on a 6-day or 6-man rotation schedule, basically put up a 200 strikeout season, so it can be done. I think Severino is going to pull that off. Now, I got a couple more predictions to round us out here, focusing next on the bullpen, so we'll get to that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And also, this is the place to go for your opening day tickets. Let me pull out the old app here and see what you could get if you're trying to go to opening day. Although I'll tell you, here's the best part about GameTime. It's the place to go for last-minute tickets. So with the weather that's out there right now, you might not want to get a ticket right away. You might want to wait, see what it's going to be, and all of a sudden, you might be able to get tickets at the last minute that you're going to love for opening day. Right now, there are tickets going for as low as $20 on the GameTime app. You can look at the entire stadium, look at the view of your seats before you arrive so you know exactly what to expect. There's all-in prices up front, so you're never surprised when you check out. This is the place to go to get your tickets for opening day or any game throughout the season. If you want to download the GameTime app, make sure when you create an account, you use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, I have 4 more bold predictions for the New York Mets this season, and we're going to start off in the bullpen. I predict that the Mets bullpen will finish with a top 5 ERA in all of baseball. I'm buying into this unit. I think the strength of this Mets team right now, it's their lineup, it's their bullpen, and it's their defense. And the real Achilles heel could be the starting rotation. Those other 3 components need to pick up that rotation at every turn. I believe the bullpen's going to be able to do that. The Mets are going to be great in close games this year. And I look at just not only the top end, which I think is great. We'll talk about Edwin Diaz in a minute here. But between Diaz, Ottavino, Rayleigh, Diekman, Drew Smith, Jorge Lopez, I think they got a lot of options that could pitch and leverage this year. And there's still that looming wild card of Shintaro Fujinami. But it's the overall depth. It's the fact that they're going to have, right now, the guys that are trying to make the team, if it's Yohan Ramirez and Sean Reed-Foley, or if it ends up being Yohan Ramirez and Michael Tonkin, or Sean Reed-Foley and Michael Tonkin, those guys at the end of the bullpen, I really like them. And if they can keep one of them in the organization, if it is ultimately Tonkin that ends up down with the AAA team, and they also have those other minor league signings they made this offseason, and then they have a prospect like Nate Lavender who could step up. You also have Christian Scott, who I believe is going to be a starter for the beginning of this season, but by the end of the year, they might make the decision to preserve his innings and make him a multi-inning reliever to help out that bullpen. You might decide to do that because he's just one of your more talented pitchers, and you want to eat up those innings with the best pitchers you can put out there. I just think this bullpen by the end of the season is going to be the thing that we look at and say, that's what put this team over the top. That's what took a 500 team and made them good enough to actually go on and win 88 games. I really believe in this bullpen. And with that said, my next bold prediction is Edwin Diaz will set the Mets single season record for saves. Who do you think holds that record? Sure, there's going to be some people saying John Franco, maybe Jesse Orozco, Billy Wagner. My youth's about to show here. Armando Benitez, Francisco Rodriguez. These are the guys I watched. Braden Looper. But the actual holder of that title is a relief pitcher that I think gets a lot of flack because of a quick pitch home run and the way the end of his Mets tenure ended up going. But we forget that Jeurys Familia, for a 2-year span, was about as dominant of relief pitcher as the New York Mets have ever had. In 2015, he was unbelievable. And look back at that playoff run. Everyone talks about the starting rotation. Outside of that one damn quick pitch to Alex Gordon, he was basically spotless. And you can't even blame that Game 5 performance on Familia. You can blame that on a couple other people, whether that's Terry Collins or Lucas Duda. Let's not relive that one today. But still, Familia was amazing. And he actually set that single season record in 2016, which I did not even remember him having 51 saves that year. And the reason why that stat boldened my stance that Edwin Diaz could actually have a 52 save season is because I see this team as one that could be very comparable to the 2016 Mets, where the vibes are just right. You win the tight games and you find your way there. And I had to look back at how many games the 2016 Mets won. I don't think they won 90. I'd have to look. But, I mean, Familia definitely saved more than half of their games because he saved 51, and they did not win 102. So let me look it up real quick. 2016, they won 87 games. So of 87 wins, Familia saved 51 of them. That's pretty ridiculous. Only 36 games did they win where it wasn't Familia getting that last out in a tight ball game. I think the same thing is going to be true this year with Edwin Diaz. I think every single time he gets into the game, there are going to be saves on the line, and he is going to be a huge, huge reason this team can be successful. He saved 57 games for the Mariners in 2018. Let's look and see how many games that Mariners team won, where Edwin saved 89 wins for the Mariners that year, and Edwin Diaz saved 57 of them. So I really do believe that we could see a truly special season from Edwin Diaz, particularly in the save department. 2 more predictions. Here's the boldest one. The New York Mets will beat out the Philadelphia Phillies for a playoff spot. I'm looking out west now. And the Arizona Diamondbacks with Jordan Montgomery, I think they might just be the best wildcard team in this league now. There's a chance. You got the Padres, the Giants in the mix. You got some good teams in the Central. I think it could come down to the Mets and the Phillies, one of them getting a playoff spot. And every year there's a team that disappoints. Now, in spirit of complete transparency and honesty, we just did staff predictions at Just Baseball. I did not predict that the Phillies would miss the playoffs. But it's my show. I'm feeling a little bit spicy today. You know what? I think that the Phillies are going to suck this year. How about that? No, I think they'll be good, but maybe just not as good as everyone's expecting, and they have a massive letdown for their fans. And the Mets sneak in there. How about it? With that said, that brings me to my final prediction. Kodai Senga will win his first playoff game. How about that? Senga's going to start game 1 of the wild card round and win it. And then maybe Sevy wins game 2. But regardless, that wraps my top 10 predictions. I'll try to run through them. I had a lot there. I got my list, but I did go off on some tangents. So let's try to see if I remember them all. Pete Alonso, 55 home runs. Francisco Lindor and Alonso finishing top 5 in MVP, with Lindor in the top 3. Brandon Nimmo and Francisco Alvarez both are all-stars, and Alvarez takes home some hardware, whether that's a silver slugger or a gold glove. Brett Baty with an 800 OPS. Zach Short stays on the roster all season, while Joey Wendell does not. Luis Severino strikes out 200. The Mets bullpen is top 5 in ERA. Edwin Diaz sets the Mets single-season record for saves, edging out Jeurys Familia, who has the record of 51. Diaz gets at least 52. And then you got the Phillies missing the playoffs because the Mets sneak in past them, and Senga wins his first playoff game. Hope you all enjoyed my top 10 bold predictions. Tell me in the comment section on YouTube how crazy I am. I'm all about that. And I'm very excited because tomorrow's show hopefully will be a preview of opening day, and I'll give you 10 reasons to believe in the New York Mets this season. A lot of them would be kind of based on what we just talked about, what we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks and months. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports, with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. You can find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.